Ah, it's good to be home. Right, just going to get a cup of tea, but first we're going to see what that Jenkins is up to. Let's see what he's been doing in the workshop whilst I've been away. Oh, nobody here, lights on. Oh, blimey, nothing much changed. Oh, he's cleaned the lathe, but made everything else untidy. Where the bloody hell is he? Jenkins? Jenkins? I don't know, Jenkins, I'm away for a month and you move a harem into the garage. I mean, they're very nice, but, you know, they've got to go. Hello and welcome to Tweed's Garage, where in this video we do a bit more work on the Riley. So, welcome back. It's been a while, been a bit busy. Summertime, car shows, things like that come along, and had a bit of a project on. Can't tell you anything about it, secret squirrel and all that, but I'll tell you one day. So sort of all my efforts were put into that, but we're back home now, working on all the projects, mainly the Riley on this one. We've picked up another project which you might have seen. We'll be doing a bit on that in the next video, so you can look forward to that. But in the meantime, we're going to go through the jobs that I've been doing on the Riley. So let's go to the garage, have a look, see what we've been doing. Come on. So my job to do is investigate the strange chirping noise that I got when I first started up. I did sort of notice that once the engine got warm, it went away a little bit and gradually got quieter. And on a cold start, I managed to find, without electrocuting myself this time, it was leaking at this joint that I thought might be trouble at some time. It's the joint between the exhaust manifold and the hot tube running to the inlet manifold. And as I said before, because this hot tube system has been gas welded, it had distorted a bit and there was a bit of a gap. So I made this plate up here, this steel plate here. But it's not 100% parallel. It's not really good, and I think it's just there's a little gap at the back, just enough for the exhaust gases to squeak out of whilst it's cold. Once it warms up, I think the gap closes up. So what I've got is a sheet of this exhaust gasket material. You can buy it in a sheet and then cut your own gasket for it. So I'm going to attempt to make a new gasket, or maybe two, you know, one behind the plate and one in front, just to sort of have enough material to squash up and close the gap up. The original gasket, because it's for the hot tube, looks like a sort of number 8, so it's got 2 holes through it for the gases to go through. But what I'm going to do is make a solid lozenge shaped gasket like the spacer plate, and just a hole for the bolt here to go through, just to maximise the amount of gasket area to bed down onto the manifold. So next job to do. Right, let's see if we can part these two without having to take the floor back out again to get this bolt out. So what I decided to do was Dremel a little hole, recess hole in the footboard. It doesn't go all the way through, just to allow the bolt to come out enough. Comes out enough there, and should be able to push this gasket and spacer out. Yeah, there you go. There you go. Job's a good one. Gasket out, we can see where it was blowing around the back side there. So let's see if we can cure this. When I removed the gasket, I found it was blowing the other side as well. So there it is, fairly easy to work with. Drilled the hole with a step drill and then flipped it over and drilled it the other side just to sort of clean up the edges a bit where the drill had pushed through. Cut it out with tin snips and then run it on the belt sander just to get it to a sort of closer shape to the original gasket. So yeah, so that's ready to go in. So again, with the new gasket, you can see it's just not pulling up square and it's leaking round the back. This is where it's leaking there. It's not compressing the gasket there, but squashing it down there. So I think we're going to have to do something about it. With the hot tube manifold undone, I then needed to take off the inlet manifold and carburettor to extract that off of the engine. So undone the bolts, pulled out the manifold with the carburettor on just to save a bit of work once the linkages were disconnected in the choke cable. Then withdrew that, and then with that off I could see the tubes that go between the inlet manifold and the hot tube manifold were in a bit of a sorry state. I had looked at them before, but didn't think that'd be an issue because I wasn't using the hot tube system, so I didn't worry too much about it. But I needed to get this hot bulb manifold off and check the face of it because it was because of this uneven pressure that it was exerting on the gasket. I needed to find out whether the face was crooked or not. So I don't know whether you can get new tubes, but I found a piece of bar that was the correct diameter of the tubes that were on there. The other tubes had been in there so long they were sort of welded into the aluminium with corrosion, and then the other end into the hot tube manifold. There'd been brazed repairs on them over the years to stop them leaking, and they'd attached them to the manifold. So it was a case of sticking the manifold on the bandsaw to cut through the tubes was the easiest way to separate them. I could then chop them down shorter, closer to the faces on the manifold. On the inlet manifold, I just carefully cut a slot with a hacksaw blade through the tube because they were so old, they weren't very thick. They'd sort of, you know, corroded away, so they're quite thin. So it was a case of just cutting a slot into the tubes and then peeling out the remaining piece of tube with a sort of screwdriver and a pair of pliers just to sort of ease them out. So that got them out of the inlet manifold. On the hot tube manifold, it was a case of grinding through the tube so I could prise out the remaining pieces of tube in the manifold there, and then just cleaned all the old braze off and cleaned up the sockets in the manifold where the new tubes were going to go. Because I'm not going to use the hot tube manifold anymore, you don't need to with modern fuels. It was only to help vaporise poor quality fuels back in the 20s. Modern fuels don't need any assistance with heating to to help them vaporise, so it's sort of a bit of a redundant system. But to sort of try and keep it looking original, I had a look around and found some steel rod that was the correct diameter to replace the tubes that were there, and that diameter is 7/8 of an inch. So I worked out the length of tubing that I needed to join the manifolds back together. So then I popped them in the lathe and drilled through one end of the bar till nearly halfway through, then flipped it over and drilled it from the other side nearly half the way through, just leaving the bottom of the hole as a blank in the middle of the tube just to block it off. There's no reason really, but I just thought I'd sort of leave it that way, just to sort of stop the transfer of heat a little bit. Yeah, so I've done that with both of them, and then they were a nice sort of snug push fit into the hot tube manifold. And then I could see, when I sort of put that on a flat surface, you could see how out of square the mounting face was on the exhaust. So having seen how out of square it was, I used those tubes as a reference, and the holes through the manifold as my sort of straight edge through the manifold, and mounted it up in the milling machine, and then faced off the mounting face on the hot tube manifold to hopefully square it off when I put it all back together. And then it was a case of just popping the hot tubes back together and then putting it back on the inlet manifold, putting it back on the car. But I did have to make a thicker blanking plate because now, of course, because I'd milled a piece off of the manifold, the gap was bigger, but it was nice and square, nice sort of parallel face. So I just found a piece of plate that would do the job, and cut that out and finished it off on the belt sander to shape. So and then popped that all back together, bolted it up, and it seems to run without making that strange chirping noise anymore. So that's a result. So hopefully we've sealed up all the exhaust and we can move on. So another little job that needed ticking off the list was to secure the battery. I've made the new battery tray, but I've never got around to making a way of fixing the battery into the tray. So I thought the best way was to have a clamping bar and a couple of rods to secure the bar to the top of the battery. So what I done first was worked out where my locating holes were going to be for my battery clamp rods, drilled those in the bottom of the battery tray, and then got a piece of just standard angle iron, so it looked a bit, well, like a bit of angle iron, so I thought I needed to sort of zhuzh it up a bit. So popped it on the mill with the digital readout on, and proceeded to drill a load of holes through both sides, just to take some of the weight out of the clamp. Not that we'll be racing, but it also, you know, makes it look a bit nicer than a piece of standard angle iron. So proceeded to drill the holes in, finish off the holes, drill the 2 holes for the fixing rods, and then gave it a coat of paint. And then I made up the fixing rods with just some sort of standard steel bar with a thread turned on each of them for the clamping nuts, and then bent up the other end so that they would go into the clamping holes in the bottom of the battery tray, and then they'd hook as soon as you started tightening them up. They'd hook under the floor of the battery to sort of pull everything together, and turned up a couple of sort of deep nuts to finish the job off, and yeah, and then popped it all in. I think I painted the rods as well, just to tidy them up. I oil blacked the clamping nuts, and then put it all together. Popped it back in, clamped the battery down. Battery is nice and secure now, which is a good thing. And then proceeded to reconnect the battery. So yeah, and a little bit of grease just to stop the corrosion. So a bit of grease on the terminals. It's probably sort of official Bosch battery grease, but I think you can use Vaseline as well. That's what they used to use. Yeah, and just a note for those that don't know, most people do of a certain generation, but younger generation don't know. When you're connecting or disconnecting a battery, now it doesn't, the younger generation will just know that most vehicles are negative earth, but older vehicles tended to be positive earth, and they sort of changed later, so it all became standard. But rule applies for both. So what you always do when you connect a battery up, you always connect the live side up first, whether it be positive on a negative earthed car or a negative on a positive earthed car. Okay, so you always connect your live lead first, do that up, and then you put on your earth lead and or your earth strap and connect that up second. And the reason for that is if you're doing up your live terminal and you haven't connected the earth, if your spanner hits any metal around there, it's not going to short out, it's not going to cause a problem. But if you've connected the earth first and then you put the live on, you have now made a circuit. There is a circuit going on there. So if you happen to touch your spanner that's on the live side against the bodywork of the car or a piece of steel, you will create a circuit and cause a short and a spark and some dirty underpants. So that is it. When connect the battery, sounds very simple, but always connect the live terminal first and then connect up your ground, your chassis ground or your earth strap second. Okay, lecture over. So yeah, that looks quite smart in there. Looks like it was meant to be. So we can put the battery away. So with this done, I then moved on to the clock. I was having trouble with it self-starting. You could wind it up and you needed to drop it out the dashboard and give it a little twist, and then it would run for 8 days, no trouble at all. Or for as long as you kept winding it up, it would keep going. So I stripped the clock apart and removed the regulating mechanism, which has the escarpment wheel on it and the balance wheel. They're both very fine mechanisms, and I was in two minds whether to take it apart, but I thought if I kept the pieces together, if the worst came to the worst, I could sort of take them along to a clock repairer to put them back for me. But if you're very careful, there is a sort of logic to it, and the springs of the balance wheel are attached to the balance wheel. It's sort of one complete assembly, and we'll just sort of gently prise out of the plate, and then once you've got that moved out of the way, you can then get to the mounting plates for the escarpment wheel, and there's another little gear in there as well. And as you can see, these are tiny pieces of kit, and I had trouble even with magnifying glasses on to see what I was doing. So hats off to people that repair clocks and watches for a living. I think it's got to be a bit of a young man's sport with good eyesight. So with it stripped down, it all looked fairly good. There was some dirt on the claws of the escarpment there. You can see that I'm just about to remove from the plate once I've got this gear out of the way. So what I'd done was I cleared that up with a piece of watchmaker's Rodico putty, which is like a plasticine material that you can sort of break bits off, roll it into a little ball and use it like sort of blue tack to sort of dab the dirt off the back of the pinions and the back of the escarpment mechanism. And there was one other thing. One of the dual bearings was sort of loose there. What they've done is they sort of put into their shouldered hole, and then with special watchmakers tools they peen over the end of the hole to clamp the rubies in place. I didn't have these tools, didn't have anything small enough to do that, so I thought just sort of it was a fairly tight fit, but it would sort of drop out, you know, if you sort of pushed it. So just a tiny amount of Loctite around the edge of the ruby, and then I popped it back into its mounting hole and let it go off, and then reassembled it, because I was thinking that if it ever needed to come together, the ruby and the brass wouldn't be affected by heat. which you could use just to sort of break the grip of the Loctite. So with it all reassembled, it was a case of placing it back in the clock and lining it up with the rest of the mechanism. The sort of stick you see there was just there to hold one of the gears to stop the spring mechanism unwinding all the way, because it goes through a huge amount of gears. It's quite a powerful spring, but the further you go down the gear set, the easier it is to stop it rotating. So it went through a gear very close to where the escarpment plate bolts in, and yeah, with it all cleaned up and wound up, it sort of seems to work okay, and it's quite satisfying seeing it going. So with that done, it was a case of reassembling the clock back in its case. The nice thing with these early clocks, they have sort of bezels that you can twist, and they've got locking tabs on, so you sort of just twist them and lift them off, so you can sort of strip down the clock. I think I've had all the gauges apart: the clock, the oil pressure gauge, the fuel gauge, and the speedometer. They all come apart relatively easy to so you can work on them, and then just put all the nuts back on the back of the case to hold it all together. That little plate is just an access hole to adjust the speed of the clock, make it fast or slower if it's gaining speed or losing speed, and then we pushed on the little brass knob which allows you to correct the hands on the clock. And then on the front, just place the support bezel for the glass into the front of the clock, and then replace the glass and the bezel on the front. Now it's got a bit of felt in there just to sort of protect the glass and give it a bit of a cushion. And then just with a quarter of a twist, bezel's back on, clock's back together, and then it's a case of popping it back in the car. So you just the hands with the knob at the back, and then there's another knob that winds in on the bottom of the case, and this is your knob for winding up the spring on the clock. But for placing it back in the dashboard of the car, you need to take that off so it will slide into the round hole easily enough, and then put the clamp on and clamp it all back together, and there it is, all lit up. Now I have to confess, it did work the first time I wound it up. It's run beautifully, but then since then it's stopped again, and I have to do the old trick of taking it out of the dashboard and giving it a twist. But it was worth a go, and it will run for 8 days, so I think if I'm using the car a lot, it'll be fine. The next area that needed a bit of attention is the spare wheel mount on the boot of the car. It's got 2 wooden buttons that are mounted on the lower boot edge, and these are just there to stop the tyre rubbing on the fabric body of the car. These are sort of screwed into the woodwork frame behind, and over the years they got water in them, the screws have rusted, and the holes have elongated or enlarged, so new screws just fall out. So the solution with this was the same that I'd done around the windscreen, was to drill the holes a little bit over size, and then fill them with glue and tap in some of those slightly smaller size furniture dowels into the hole, and tap them home with a hammer just above the surface, because they're slightly tapered at the edge. Then once the glue's gone off, I just use the Dremel just to sort of sand them back to the same level as the framework of the boot body, and then they're ready to be pre-drilled, and with new screws put the buttons back in. So then I moved on to undoing the mounting pad for the spare wheel. This is held on with 2 through bolts that go through the wooden framework of the boot, and this is accessible from inside the car, because on the Riley you get in from the boot from the lid at the top, or you can, the rear seat hinges upwards and there's a leather strap to hook it onto the ceiling, so you can get into the boot from the back, which is quite handy actually. So it took a little bit of persuasion, as you know, they've been on there for 90 years plus and never been out. So tapped the bolts out, got them out of the way, and got the pad off, and then it was a case of lying down in the boot and grovelling around and trying to remove the clawed angle plates that are sort of tapped into the woodwork to stop the bolt from going round, because the bolt is a coach bolt with one flat edge to it, and you can see there the flat edge, and then that corresponds with the 90-degree bend on this captive plate that allows you to tighten it up and get it in position. So it had buried itself quite deep in there, so managed to wiggle it out and persuade it out. But I think I sort of decided I needed to do something about this to try and beef it up a bit. And then these are all the bits of furniture once they've been taken out of the car. And there you can see the sort of knock-on fixing plate. So the system for holding the spare wheel on is this wooden block is bolted to the back of the car to the framework of the boot with one bolt here, and then there's a through bolt that secures the top, but also it comes all the way through, and then you hang the spare wheel on this bolt and then attach it with one wheel nut. So all the weight of the wheel is hanging on this wooden frame in the boot. And the thing is, the original way of fixing it was this captive staple plate that goes on the back, and then this bolt goes through. It's got a flat shoulder on it, coach bolt with a flat shoulder that attaches like that, that locks in like that, and then you can tighten it up. But as you can see, over the years where it's been tightened, this plate has gradually pulled through into the wood and sort of thinned out the thickness of wood that's supporting the weight of the wheel. So this is why I made this plate. So we're going to sort of replace that staple with this assembly here. So steel plate that straddles the wooden frame, and then the bolt goes through, and it's got this steel plate welded to it that acts as a captive edge for the coach bolt, like that, and then the weight spread over the whole piece of timber rather than in sort of one central point. So it should make the spare wheel a little bit more stable. So there you go, a few little jobs knocked off the list of things to do. Whilst I was doing that, I did pop along to the a local transport show we have near me. It's a Thornycroft Day down in Basingstoke, and yeah, it's a good turnout. It was a good turnout this year. It was absolutely packed, like a lot of things after the lockdown and everything. People were just going to everything, so it was absolutely heaving with people. So I did run round a bit and done the classic cars and some of the vintage cars. So here are some of the cars I saw, and I'll put some music on just to ease you on your way, and I'll interrupt you occasionally just to tell you what model cars they are for your information. Okay, so let's go and have a little wander. So firstly we have this lovely little mini traveller with aluminium steel wheels, which are unusual, and then a standard Vanguard, nicely done. Obviously had a lot of work done to it over the years. And of course, who could walk by the Aston Martin DB6 without having a little look, and this is a particularly nice example. What a lovely day to take it out for a picnic in the park. And for those that don't know, this is a Jensen 541S, and personally I think they're a lovely looking car, built by the Jensen company, so sort of steel chassis, fiberglass body, and V8 power, and a lovely interior to boot. Very nice place to be. Here we have a pair of the much maligned Austin Maxi, but personally I like them, and I think they're a very useful classic car to have, and all the people I know that have had them over the years haven't got a bad word to say about them. They all thought they were fantastic cars to have. You know, obviously with a bit of the British Leyland reliability issues and build quality, but a great car. And then we have a lineup of Austins. Couple of Austin 7s, an Austin 10, and then we have this early Java, which are sort of unusual compared to cars of similar size. These ran a flat twin engine, you know, like a BMW motorcycle, and they were very good apparently. A nice torquey little engine, very reliable. Unfortunately, I don't know about these ones, but the later Jupiter and Javelin were let down by very weak gearboxes, and I've heard stories of when people used to go on holiday down to Devon and Cornwall in their Javelins, they'd put a spare gearbox in the boot, and father would change it once they'd got down there to get back home again. And then we have this very imposing Buick in lovely condition with its shiny chrome, big 6-cylinder engine, and its varnished wooden wheels, unusual to British eyes, but not unusual for American cars of this era. And this one looks to be like it was a sort of a chauffeur-driven limousine, with its divider between driver and passengers. So they didn't have to talk to the driver, or the other way round, I should imagine, a lot of the time. And then we have a Austin 10, bigger than the 7, and sort of fitted out more like the Austin 12 with the controls on the steering wheel there. And then this lovely Morris Oxford with its bull nose radiator, all in brass, looking very fine. And this unusual radiator belongs to a Triumph. Not sure what model this is, whether it's a Mayflower. But yeah, plenty of polishing for somebody. Very Art Deco. And then we have a Austin 12 or an Austin Heavy fabric body in very original condition with this lovely leather interior, and yeah, superb condition. What a lovely thing. And then we've got a little Morris Minor and a Lanchester with its lovely aluminium engine and carburettor and inlet there, nicely engineered. And this very nice sporty little Morris, in very good condition. And obviously somebody's earning some brownie points. Out the wife to bring some plants home from the on the plant stalls. And then this is one of my personal favourites, this little Singer. Absolutely lovely thing with an overhead valve engine, so quite advanced for the time. And yeah, what was quite interesting is that the fuel tank filler is in front of the passenger. So yeah, I think just there, and right next to it the ashtray. The owner didn't think the ashtray was original. And then this beautiful Wolseley Hornet in superb condition with its lovely straight six engine, twin SU carburettors. So I should imagine this romps along quite nicely. And then lastly this lovely little Humber that the owner has had for years and restored it and keeps it running. And he's sort of done work on the rear axle. Apparently it's a weak point on these, the gears and the half shafts, so I think the club remakes half shafts for them so you can keep these cars running. And like the Singer, it has the fuel filler in front of the passenger, just there. That's nice on a run. So there you go, progress is being made, all those fiddly little jobs getting out of the way, it's nearly there. The ton bag of wood chippings has been moved, so I can now open the garage door, so that's the result. So there's nothing really to stop me from moving it out and running it around, apart from I need to finish the front valance because that's what the number plate hangs from. So I need that to go on the road. But from what I saw the other day, motorcycles herring around with no number plates on, it doesn't seem to matter nowadays, so maybe it's not a problem. So there you go. If you like that, give us a little like, and you know, if you enjoy it, subscribe, because there's more nonsense coming along, and we've got more stuff to do. Yeah, so see you next time. Right, Jenkins, you're going to have to ask those ladies to leave. No, they've got to go now, okay, before Mrs. Tweed finds them. Good man. So there you go, a few little jobs being done. Getting there slowly. The pile of wood chippers have been, pardon me,